Coming up today, the Empress of the Seas leads the way into Cozumel and sets her own course out. Sit down with a dance captain to find out all about these production shows, and the pool deck gets a little bit busy. It's all coming up, so let's set sail. Welcome to day 5 of the cruise view from on board the Empress of the Seas. Today was Monday, October 14th, 2019, and our third port of call of this sailing. Today was a visit to the only port of call on this voyage that I've been to before, and that was Cozumel, Mexico. We had a very early arrival. We were one of 3 ships in port, and we had the longest day of them all, even though we had the most recently scheduled call to Cozumel. We did not set our clocks back at all, so we were still on East Coast time, even though we were in Cozumel, which is off an hour from the East Coast. And that meant that in order to watch our arrival on time, I had to get up at 5:30 this morning. Got out on that deck a little before 6, and at 6:09, the pilot boat pulled up to the ship to get on board. We then sailed right up to the dock, began tying off at about 6:30 this morning, and it was all in pitch black because the sunrise did not even start to occur until 7 a.m. when that first bit of light started to show on the horizon. As I mentioned, we were not the only ship in port. There were 2 other ships with us. There are 3 different ports in Cozumel. Each one can support multiple ships, and we had the middle of the 3 ports. Directly in front of us was where the Carnival Valor docked. She arrived on the horizon at about 6:30 in the morning. Still pitch black, just all those lights up on the horizon. And about 8:15 she began arriving at her pier, and she took an incredibly long amount of time in order to make her docking. She started that arrival at 8:15 as mentioned, but she did not just pull in straight as we did. She decided to spin around before docking this morning, and it was not until about 8:35 that she started moving to the pier, so it was over 20 minutes to do that single 180-degree rotation. And once she did move to the pier, it was another 10 minutes until she was actually alongside and began to tie off. So I don't know what the cause was, but it was certainly an incredibly long arrival for the Valor this morning. And behind us, down a little bit from us, was where the Disney Fantasy made her arrival to. And she showed up on that horizon at 7:45 a.m. and began arriving to her pier at 8:48, with getting completely alongside at about 8:53 a.m. So her arrival was significantly quicker than the Valor and more in line with how our arrival went this morning. So 3 different ships in port. It was certainly not the busiest port days for Cozumel with so many piers, but it was a fairly full day with enough ships to occupy every port and give plenty of crowd coverage to the entire shore side there. This evening we then had a departure at 6 p.m. it was scheduled for. We were the first to ride this morning with our 7 a.m. arrival time. And the other ships, according to everything I saw, were supposed to get there about an hour after us. They ended up getting there closer to that 9 o'clock hour, so about 2 hours after us. And yet all of us left at the same time, 6 p.m. Originally the Fantasy was to leave 15 minutes before us, but she did not leave quite on time. Just before our departure time, the captain did make an announcement saying that there were 2 guests missing that we were waiting on, and he'd give them a couple minutes until 6 o'clock before leaving without them. I do not know if they got on board, but at 6 o'clock we did start leaving. We untied everything and headed off from the pier. We were one of 3 ships, and before us, the Fantasy had already departed along with the Valor. They both left at pretty much exactly 6 p.m. They were pulling away from their piers at almost the exact same moment. Well, we didn't start removing our ties until 6 p.m., so we left at about 6:10 that we started to pull away from the pier. And didn't take long. We spun around very quickly, much quicker than the Valor, and by 6:23 we were already unloading the Pilot. Then with that departure, the weather played a major role, so we're going to move on to the weather for today. As I mentioned, we had a sunrise after our arrival. It was scheduled for 7:42 a.m. That first light showed up at 7 a.m. It was a lengthy sunrise this morning, taking nearly an hour, and was right over top of Cozumel, so it lit the city up and the skyline as it slowly rose over the port side of the ship. This evening, our sunset was then at 7:25 p.m., and while we couldn't see it because of some poor weather that went through the area, as soon as that weather cleared out, we did catch the very tail end of that sunset this evening. And for our conditions today, it was overall, according to the compass, cloudy. Did not seem like that. It was a rather warm, hot day, as we've been getting a lot of sunshine. Bit of cloud cover this morning on the horizon. You always saw a bit of haze. It was incredibly humid all day long. But this afternoon we did get tons of rain showers, and this evening the conditions have drastically changed from the way they were in the morning. We had a listed high of 88 degrees, and it certainly felt that way. But once we got to that departure time, all around the ship, you could see that gray wall of rain falling around us. And as the Valor departed and the Disney Fantasy, they both slowly slipped off into that haze of rain and disappeared out of sight while not too far away from the ship. They ultimately came back into sight once we cleared that rain. As we departed, we did not get stuck in the rain. We did get a little bit of a drizzle for a moment, not even enough to clear the pool deck as everyone was out there watching a movie. But we made it through while the rest of the ship seemed to kind of get stuck in that rainstorm. It wasn't until about 7:30, while still following the Disney Fantasy with the Valor right alongside of us, that we finally were forced to sail into one of those severe storms and just get a torrential downpour that had to clear everything. And then tonight, as I mentioned, things are very different than earlier in the day. Once that storm rolled through, I happened to be in the windjammer at the time and saw that downpour. Things did clear up afterwards. Right before we hit that storm, the seas started to pick up. According to the captain, we're supposed to get about 6-foot seas tonight. Could definitely feel the ship rocking tonight. The whole ship's moving around more than we've felt the entire sailing. A bit more than we've seen on the other ships even. So it's certainly being felt on board finally. And once we got past that rain, got onto the clearing on the other side, we saw the Fantasy sail off and the Valor sail off in the other direction, while we suddenly had very different conditions. It was much cooler, a bit more wind, about 10-mile-an-hour wind blowing over the ship tonight, and it was actually comfortable to be outside for the first time today. So hopefully this weather will continue tomorrow. We finally got rid of that humidity. Temperatures dropped slightly. It is night, so obviously it'll be a little bit cooler than during the day, but hopefully we'll get a little bit better sea conditions. Captain said it'll be about 3 feet tomorrow instead of 6 feet like tonight. Moving on to the compass summary then for today. We were in port. That means a little bit lighter during the day, but it was a very busy evening tonight. And started out, of course, with that early morning arrival. Got up very early, started my day earlier than probably any other day this voyage. And that also meant an earlier breakfast before that sunrise. And overall, a very productive morning of filming around the ship with all those arrivals, and then plenty of time to get some shooting of the venues on board in. But at the same time, at 9 a.m., there was a crew training going on in the pool. There was a decent-sized crowd in the pool at the time watching it and cheering them on as they worked with the inflatable life raft and got trained on how to safely operate the vessel and ensure that all the guests are taken care of at all moments. Then had a lunch in the windjammer before heading off to the shore at about noon today. Took some time to walk around the entire port, check it all out. This was the same pier that we docked at with the Grandeur of the Seas back in January 2014, but the port looked incredibly different. It was almost unrecognizable as the same port of call from 5 years ago. They really developed a lot of it, added new buildings. Last time we were there, it had one central building, and the rest of the port was, for the most part, pretty much empty cement area to walk around. This time there were so many little buildings added, and pretty much the entire plot of land was filled up with buildings and shops. So it was a very different looking and feeling port of call than the one that we had been to just 5 years ago. And while it did look different, the one thing that unfortunately did remain though is last time we went to Cozumel, it was incredibly pushy with the shopping and trying to get you into their stores, and that still remains. So even with the newer port, a lot more shops, a lot more things to see and do, more restaurants, new restaurants as well, they're still very pushy, which kind of is a turn-off to the whole port and pushes people away from wanting to spend much time actually in the port area versus getting right back to the ship. But we did spend about 3 hours there, went to Margaritaville for some drinks before heading back to the ship, and got on at about 3 o'clock to get ready for dinner. Tonight, since we did have a 6 p.m. departure, it was not just 1 but 3 ships in port to watch depart, decided to skip the dining room where the menu wasn't that appealing and head to the Windjammer instead. So after all those departures were done at about 6:30 p.m., I headed off to the Windjammer for dinner. And this Windjammer on board the Empress of Seas is by far the best Windjammer in the fleet that I have experienced. It is so much better in terms of the variety of food than the other ships and the operating hours of it. There are not many dining venues on board the Empress of Seas, but she does have a Windjammer that is open pretty much from morning to night. It closed I think like 1:30 at night, and it opens like 6 a.m. every morning. And normally when there's the gap between breakfast and lunch and dinner, the venue's just shut down. Here it always operates. Since it is the only complimentary venue to go for food beyond the main dining room, it has to be open almost at all times for guests. So rather than having periods where the venue shuts down and reopens, they simply close one side during those downtimes, let the other side continue to operate with the remaining food from the previous meal and slowly migrating in some of the new items for the next meal. And it just kind of goes through a transitional period. So there's never a true point during the day where the venue is closed. It's continuously operating, and it is constantly changing. You'd think with it doing a rollover like that, there'd be more carryover between meals, but lunch versus dinner, there's so much that they change out, unlike some of the other ships that we've been on recently. And even day to day, the items are constantly changing, so there's always something new to try. It has more variety, probably more items that I've eaten in these first few days on this sailing than the past 4 or 5 sailings combined, because there's just so many items that switch from day to day. Even basic things like the salads that remain the same on Symphony every day are changing between not just days, but even lunch to dinner on board this ship. So that was about 6:30, closer to about 6:45. And while in there, that big rainstorm did come through and drench the ship. Afterwards, when we left the Windjammer, looking across at the pool deck, there were tons of people sitting under in this area because at 6 p.m. they did have a showing of Spider-Man on the big movie screen, and despite the rain, a lot of people stuck it out, and it was a decent crowd, all just huddled under the roof here. For me, though, I did not watch Spider-Man. Instead, showing in the Royal Theater was a showing of the movie Rocket Man. I did not get to it at the beginning. It started at 7 a.m., but I was still busy after eating and then headed to the Centrum because at 7:45 was the Putting on the Hits game show hosted by Andy, as we've seen many of those Centrum events. And this one was almost identical to the one that Casey put on the other day for the game by a different name, where he played a song and then guests had to run down there and name the artist and the song title, except instead of pride points, he actually had some keychains and highlighters to hand out this time. And that one, as we've seen many times, does not go as planned. It seems like a pretty straightforward, simple concept, but as most things do on board the Empress, they tend to go out of hand and go into uncharted territory, and that certainly happened tonight with this game. So that was 7:45, went until about 8:15. At that point, I then did go into the Royal Theater and caught the last roughly hour of Rocket Man. Once that ended, I took some time to head out onto Deck 6, look at the ocean. Could really feel the ship rocking at that point still. And out over the ocean, we had the beautiful full moon once again tonight. shining on that water with all those waves in it. And you can see the waves just cracking off the bow, splashing down along the side. So it's just an incredible thing to see out there. And despite all that rain, it felt beautiful, as I mentioned, but it also looked beautiful out there because we had clear skies and all that rain was now past behind us. So after spending some time out there, I then returned to the Centrum because 9:30 was the hot seat game show. And that one once again saw Andy return to the Centrum to host that game show, which featured one contestant, one guest, brought up onto the Centrum stage area, and Andy would ask them repeated questions. If they got it right, they continued. Once they got it wrong, though, they were out, and as long as they got one right, they got a keychain or highlighter. And that went through several rounds, as even the first game did, though. It did devolve into a bit of chaos once again, as competition has not been a big thing on this sailing, and that was the case for this, as everyone in the audience simply wanted to shout out the answers and help out, and it turned into a long comedy sketch rather than an actual game show.
Name a rock group with long beards. Alright! Give him chance. If he's stuck, then give him the answer. Right, you're all coming to Flash Trivia tomorrow. That's what everybody can shout. Alright? ZZ's up. ZZ, yes, I've said yes.
Once that ended, I then once again made my way back into the Royal Theatre. Missed the beginning, but caught the middle part of the showtime for tonight, which was a single one at 9:45. Seems like they may have had an act canceled because 7 p.m. Rocket Man and this 9:45 showtime would have been the traditional time periods, and Rocket Man is showing again tomorrow night at 10:45. But tonight, 9:45 was the one-time showing of Jazz Cabaret with the Royal Caribbean Singers and the Empress, the Seas Orchestra. We've seen this on several of the recent sailings. This is something they've started doing where the singers get an opportunity to have a little more casual show where they can just sing songs that they want for the audience. And the orchestra gets to do a similar thing of playing whatever songs they want. We've seen some ships do it in different nights where they each get a song set to perform. Others do it as a single night where they have an intermission between the two parts. But we've seen it on several sailings, but this is the first time I've seen it utilized with a 20-minute set for each group to actually perform as the main headliner showtime for a night. Following that, though, we then got away from the usuals. Didn't go to Bolero's, Centrum, or Royal Theatre. Instead, we headed up here to the pool deck because at 10:30 p.m. was the Dancing Under the Stars Caribbean party. Been a long time since we've had a deck party like this. It's something that used to be a standard feature on every single sailing. It was a huge event, tons of food, everybody on the ship would come out, huge crowds, a lot of excitement and energy to it. That all seemed to go away shortly after those midnight buffets did, as well as along with those chocolate buffets. But they did not have food in this, but they did have a more traditional party. Last time I think was probably the Independence season 2012 on that transatlantic that we got to see one of these pool deck parties held at night. And it took place on the other side of the pool from where we are. They actually reopened the pool for the event. It was flashing around a lot from the ship moving, but they opened it, had the lifeguard there and everything. And they played all different music with the live band before the event started, and once the official party started, it switched over to the DJ playing, and Elvis hosted it. It was very interactive, a lot of dancing, showing off different dances to people, teaching them how to perform them, and then going through them with the songs. So it really forced everybody to get into it and get involved. And the entire time Elvis played into it, really jumping on people that were trying to get away from the dance floor or walking through without dancing and trying to pull them all in. So it was a different kind of party than the others. It was not about a performance or a show, but it really was about trying to get people to dance and into it. It was very similar, in my opinion, to what we saw with the MSC White Party, where the cruise director staff was really trying to teach people to dance and going through a really wide variety of songs rather than trying to stick to a tiny little niche of music. So that was a very good party and did not seem like a very large crowd, but for how empty every venue has been on this sailing, it certainly seemed like an equivalent crowd of what you would expect for a party like this up here on the pool deck tonight. So that was 10:30, went until almost 12 o'clock, and then fizzled out because at 12 p.m. it moved over to the Viking Crown Lounge, where it continued on for later into the night. But that was the end of the official Compass for today. We do have a couple other items though tonight, because we do have an interview. We had the singers performing tonight, and the dancers will be back with the second production show on the last day of the sailing. But tonight, I got to sit down with Andrew, who is the dance captain for the Royal Theatre cast, to learn more about the shows on board and how they make it all work with the Empress of the Seas. Today I am joined by Andrew, who is the dance captain on board the Empress of the Seas. Thanks for joining me.
No, thank you for having me.
So, could you provide a little bit of background on yourself?
So, I started dancing when I was about 12 years old. I trained as a commercial and a hip-hop dancer, first and foremost. I'm from a small town outside of Manchester, so I had to travel into the city every day to train, and we competed in worlds, and that's what it was all about until I was about 16 years old, because high school in the UK we finish at 16 rather than 18. So at 16 I kind of, what do I do next? What comes next? And then I actually went to a ballet school because I decided if I want to do everything, I've got to know everything. Mm-hmm. So I went to a ballet school where I trained in ballet, tap, jazz, contemporary, and I did everything. It was a struggle, but we got through it, and then I graduated when I was 19 years old, and then I've kind of been working ever since. Yeah. So it's been really cool. I've been really lucky with my career so far.
So what led you to join a cruise ship?
So in the UK, a lot of work on land doesn't really exist anymore. It's really hard to find, so you have to go overseas regardless for a lot of things, unless you do the West End and you do musicals. So for me, when these auditions kept popping up to travel and not pay rent because London's expensive, that was like a perfect opportunity really, and that's why I jumped at it straight away. So I just auditioned for various different companies. I worked for a previous company when I was first 19, and then after that contract I kind of wanted to be on land and move to the city because it's something I'd never really done before. So I did that. It didn't really last long because London's a hard gig. It's really hard to get a nice balance of living, working, and still performing and having your craft all together. So yeah, and then that's when I found my audition for Royal Caribbean, and then that's when I came here.
Yeah. So how did you end up on the Empress of the Seas?
How I ended up on the Empress of the Seas, so I was originally cast for a ship called Grandeur of the Seas, and so I did a full contract there, and at the end you get to submit for where you'd like to go next. Doesn't always kind of work out, but they kind of take it into consideration. And I really wanted to be a part of the Sequins and Feathers shows because with my commercial background and then the new current shows, combining it with that jazz technique and performance, I was like, that's exactly what I want to do, 100%. So I applied for all the Sequin shows across the fleet, and then with the dates and everything, it turned out that I came here. So it was really nice.
So with the Empress of the Seas, she is the oldest, the smallest ship in the Royal Caribbean fleet, but since she just rejoined a couple years ago, her shows were all brand new post-quantum design ships. Yeah. And how did they take that concept and manipulate it into this older vessel?
So what I think is the coolest part about especially Sequins and Feathers 3 is it follows the journey of the showgirl between past, present and the future. So what I think is really cool is when you think about the classic showgirl, it is a cabaret style show, and it's a cabaret lounge that they were born in with the Moulin Rouge, with Lido and Jubilee out in Vegas and all these things. So it comes from an intimate cabaret style venue. So to bring it here was kind of perfect because that's exactly what we have here. We don't have a huge theatre, we have a very intimate cabaret style theatre. So it made complete sense to put a version of Sequins and Feathers here because it brought back that nostalgic sense of what the showgirl was and combined it with today's new modern music and costuming, and as well as the atmosphere, because it's that music and that atmosphere that Sequins and Feathers creates put into that tiny venue's electric, and it's incredible, and I think it's very smart how they've done it. It's really nice.
So the first show that we saw the sailing was Bailamos. Could you give a little bit of the concept on that?
So Bailamos is a very ballroom-based show. We start off with more classic, like jive type ballrooms with going into like a quick step, and then we start firing into like a tango and a Latin fiesta section, which marries with the ship perfectly because the whole ship has a very Spanish heritage Cuban feel to it throughout the whole ship, with the godmother being Gloria Estefan. So it's really cool how they've married that into the show, and it kind of takes the guests on a journey, especially with docking out of Miami. We do have a lot of Spanish heritage guests on board, so for them it's perfect. It's either taking them back and reminiscing, or it's just music that they love as well as myself as well. So it's really cool. And with that show I got to learn a whole new style. Never done ballroom before. It was a struggle, but we got there. We've got an incredible ballroom couple that have just got this amazing knowledge about them. And yeah, I think it's a really cool show, and it marries perfectly in with the vibe of the ship, which is nice.
Then the second show, as you mentioned, is another one of the Sequins and Feathers productions. It is the third in the series, aptly named 3.
Yes.
Could you give a little information on that one?
So we open with a huge classic Sequins and Feathers opening, big grand, the wings and everything. It's incredible. I remember that being like, when I saw the opening of the video, I was like, okay, this is one of the shows that we want to do. But then it takes you straight back to like the very birth of the showgirl, and it talks about the past showgirl, and how it grew and how it was from the Can-Can and the Moulin Rouge, and then it takes you into an explosive modern day, what it's become now, like the pop diva of today. So it's becomes more of a concert. And you're interacting with the crowd a little bit, interacting with each other. It's a lot more modern. The costumes are a lot more modern, and the choreography is a lot more modern. And then from there, we jump straight into the future of what we think the showgirl is going to be in the future, which is a lot to do with technology and screening and lights and different visual effects that can be created on the stage. So that's what it plays with all the way through it, and it's really nice because you can distinctly see all 3 phases. And it's a really cool show how they've done it.
So throughout these shows, there's a lot of different concepts, different styles to it. What is your favorite scene of them?
My favourite scene has to be the opening of Sequins and Feathers, because it's such a contrast to Bailamos. So when people come and see it and they see it's about showgirls and they hear that first music start, they know it's going to be something different. So when the singers come out, and the singers kind of hyping the crowd up a little bit, and then we're stood behind the mid-curtain, and the mid-curtain rises, and as the girls and the guys as well turn around with these huge wings, the whole audience just goes and they sit back because they're not expecting these huge extravagant costumes that light up, and like the girls looking gorgeous with these long legs and the guys in the suits, and they come out and we just hit them with this choreography, and it creates such an atmosphere where everyone just goes wow. And you literally, I remember our opening night, we weren't expecting it at all. We turned around and everyone goes and we were like, oh my god, we're showgirls. So I think that's the coolest moment, and it kind of doesn't get old either, which is really nice.
So with this ship, these shows, you've got a lot of dancing involved compared to the other ships in the fleet. Both shows are very heavily focused on that dancing element. So what kind of special skills and mastery is required to be a part of this cast?
I don't think it's more or less like a skill and a mastery, or neither experience, because a lot of our cast are brand new out of college as well. This is like their first job. I think it just depends on the performer themselves and how hard they're willing to work. Like, I'm very, very lucky with the cast that I'm working with at the moment, is their attention skills and their attention to detail and their work ethic is just unreal. So I come into note sessions and I'm like, I had to watch the number 3 times to pick at a note to give to you guys, because it's their work ethic behind it. You can't be sloppy on shows like this, especially in Sequins. There's so much detail within that choreography and so much stamina that you've got to work hard and really retain it yourself and then come together as a team. So it's really cool.
The Royal Caribbean's Royal Theatre cast are known for not only their dancers but also their singers. On this ship though, that line is a little blurry as the singers are often dancing throughout the shows. What kind of involvement do you have with the singer side to help them with that?
I work very closely with my vocal captain. Obviously I hand everything vocally and a lot of technical things off to her as well, because she's got a great ear. She's trained and worked really hard to understand all the technical aspects within a theatre. So when something doesn't quite sound right or anything, I'm like, Ali, this is your gig. So she's amazing at that. But I work really closely with them because they're all great movers and they're all great performers. So getting to work with them and just be like, if you just did it a little bit more like this, or if you think about it in this way, I push this a little bit more. It's so cool to see them grow in something that they in other shows wouldn't get to do that very much, because singers don't technically dance that much, but in these shows it's so heavy. So it's great to see them grow within that role as well, which is really nice.
With Empress being a smaller ship, that also means a lot of the crews are smaller, and that includes your cast.
Yes.
How do you make the show work with such a small cast compared to some of the other ships in the fleet?
It can be hard, it can be difficult, but I'm really lucky with the work ethic of my team, because they're so in it as a team and as a performer that I can literally change anything at a drop of a hat, and they're like, yeah, got it, we're there for you, we've got it. So I'm really very lucky to have such a strong team behind me, because that means any issue that we do face, it can happen like that. Whereas with any other cast, that might not be the case. So even though we're small, because we're so strong, it really works out. It's like a nice balance between the two, really.
Yeah. So, and with that smaller cast and these shows, all that high energy, seemed like more than any other show, the cast was out on stage the entire time. There were short gaps to get changed, but for the most part, everybody seemed to be in every single song. How do you manage to keep all that energy up through such a strenuous show?
It was a process. When we learned the show, we'd be on the floor just like that, being like, how are we going to do this twice a night? But the more our bodies get used to it, it's just muscle memory, and it's just we just got to work out. We've got to we make sure we go to the gym and we keep in shape, and we kind of do everything that a healthy performer does, but a little bit more so on the side, just to make sure we're on top of things. But again, it's just the more you do something, the repetition, it gets more in your body. So we used to be on the floor after like half a show run, whereas now we're on the floor after 2 show runs. So we're getting there, so it's good. We just got to keep on top of it.
Everybody gets sick sometimes. When someone is sick or has to miss the show in this cast, how do you handle it when it's a little more noticeable if one of 6 or 8 is missing from a show?
So one thing is, we get asked this question a lot, is who are the understudies, and we're all each other's understudies. So singers more often than not know each other's tracks, know each other's songs, and they already are on top of that material. Same with the dancers. So when we have solos and duets, more or less the whole cast. Well, normally in another cast you'll have understudies set. In this cast we know everything. We know everybody's parts. The boys even know the girls' parts, kind of thing. And we just make sure we can cover everybody. So when I come in, if anything, God forbid, was to happen, I was to come in and say, okay guys, we need to reblock, we need to respace. They've got it like this. I can be like, you're going to do the duet with her. Can you run it? Let's see how it looks, and then we'll figure out costumes later. So it's kind of great that they've got my back with that as well.
The big thing with all the sequins and feather productions is always those large, extravagant costumes. How do you work with those costumes on a smaller ship that moves a bit more than some of those larger ones?
So you make sure you're in your space. We've learnt this the hard way, especially when we was teching and we were doing dress rehearsals and coming into the ship for the first time. We learnt it the hard way, like suddenly you'll turn around and there's a wing in your face, and the girl doesn't feel it, but you do. So it's definitely being very precise and being very on your game. Like there's no room for error within those numbers. Like sometimes when it rocks a little bit, you can be like, I'm meant to be on 7, but I'm actually on 8, like kind of thing. But with those numbers, there's no room for error. So it really makes you focus and work and be a little bit more dedicated to your job. Like there's no room for slack, there's no room for kind of sitting back in the show or anything like that. You've really got to be on your game. So it's a nice personal challenge, but it is a challenge as well.
So what is next for you after the Empress?
For me, what is next? Well, who knows? Whoever knows. They always say that a dancer's job is auditioning and then vacation is actually getting the job. So hopefully, I love being a part of the Sequins and Feathers show, so hopefully I'd love to go to another sequin show around the fleet, or maybe on a bigger scale, or who knows. I'd love to do a 270 venue, because they're just crazy, like the things that they do in those venues. So I think for me it's just kind of doing this on a bigger scale, or like on another ship or something like that.
Is there anything else that you'd like to tell the viewers?
I just love being here with Royal. I think I'm having a great experience, and you should come and check out the shows.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So as always, I have to thank Andrew for taking the time to talk to me. It's always interesting hearing about these shows. It is different on every ship. Every show has its own little nuances that are unique to it. Every ship has some characteristics that are different than the others. So it's always interesting to hear about what makes everything work for each of these ships as we go through. And there is only one cast on board, which means all these shows are being formed purely by them. There isn't a Studio B or 270 cast. It is just that one slightly smaller World Theater cast responsible for all the production shows during this voyage. So in addition to an interview tonight, we do also have a daily venue tour, and today we're going to look at where that party took place, where I'm sitting right now with a look at that pool deck on board. The Empress of the Seas pool deck is like everything else in her. Smaller than the guests may be used to, but it received an overhaul when returning to the fleet and was a test bed of what the largest ships are now receiving in dry dock. On Deck 10, the center of the pool area features an elevated structure with 3 sections. One containing the ship's hot tubs, one that is used as a bandstand, and the third as a covered seating area. Forward of that is the single main pool on board, surrounded by lounge chairs for sunbathing. Aft of it is a small child splash area and an open space for games and parties. The forward end of the deck features outdoor seating for the windjammer, including an ice cream machine and 24-hour drink station. While there is no deck overlooking the pool areas found on modern ships, either side of the deck is still under the shade with sections of chairs and tables. The aft end of the pool area is dominated by the pool bar with a large overhang area that allows it to be used even in inclement weather. Directly above it, mounted onto the funnel, is a large video screen for use in games and showing movies and sports. In addition to the more active space of the main pool deck, on Deck 11 forward, guests can find some quiet space to relax. Featuring the traditional lounge chairs all the way around the deck, this area was also a test for the future of the pool deck, with several hammocks available for guests to relax and watch the sea go by. In addition to those overlooking the pool are a variety of other seating options. So while the pool area may be small, it certainly meets the needs of a ship of Empress's size, while trying to stay up to date with the latest standards. So that pool deck is obviously a bit smaller than the one that we find on the other ships. It is not a massive modern ship. She is an older ship from 1990, and that means she has a much smaller pool deck. And despite her age, her size, the size of this pool deck, it seems to actually be adequate for the capacity on board, and more importantly, for the interest of the guests on board. As it's not really overly crowded, it seems to be the exact size needed for this sailing. So that about does it for this episode of the Cruise View. As always, be sure to tune in tomorrow. Tomorrow is a sea day. We're going to have a lot more activities going on, more events. It is the second formal of this voyage, so we'll probably have those special Royal Caribbean 50th anniversary cakes involved. So be sure to come back tomorrow. As always, I'm Derek Cohn. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for those links.